how to start a cash flowing rental property business. So what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about different rental properties that you should be focusing on. We're going to go through the recipe for cash flow rentals. And we're going to go through some of these different types of rentals. You've got the long-term residential rental. Okay, this is where somebody goes in there. They're going to be there for 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years. You've got short-term, which is typically classified as anything less than 21 days. I don't know why 21, but that's typically. Some cities say it's less than 30 days. But with this, you're basically talking about nightly rentals. Then you've got like apartment commercial or apartment residential commercial. You've got commercial, you've got warehouse. Those are all different types of rentals. Today, we're just going to be talking about long-term. Oh, let's get back over here. Today, we're just going to be talking about long-term rentals, okay? We're talking about long-term rentals is what we're going to talk about. So all those other ones could have their own day as well, but right now we're going to talk about long-term rentals. So let's talk about what is this recipe? What's the secret recipe to actually having cash flow on rental properties? Well, number one recipe is to buy the property right. Well, how do you know if you're buying it right? We'll get to that. But if you don't buy the property right, you're going to mess up on so many other things, okay? Number two, you need to purchase regularly. So you need to be buying properties regularly on some consistent basis. If you're trying to time the market, you're going to get yourself in trouble. And then the next recipe is called cost segregation. Then we get into solid management strategy. Then we get to time. Tenant pays down the loan amount. So that's what we're looking at here. Buy right, buy regularly, cost segregation, solid management team, and time. Don't worry, we're going to get more into this here in just a moment. So let's talk about each one of these individually so you have a really good idea. First off, let's talk about that buy right. How do I actually make sure I buy this property right? Well, property values go up over time. They just do. Over the last 30 years, the median sales price went up 30 to 40% every 10 years over the last 30 years. So the 10-year period, you're looking at prices of houses going up 30 to 40%. And keep in mind, that even included 2008, where we had a major price correction, and we still saw values going up 30 to 40%. So yeah, each year on average, you're talking 3 to 4% values are going up on average. That's on an average. It's not going to happen every single year, but if you take a 10-year perspective, you are going to see it actually going up. The other thing that you'll see is this is the values. Let me grab this. What we're basically looking at here is values. And so you can see about every 10 years here, if you want to look at that, you know, back here at 1965, you're looking at like $20,000, and the median house price is now pushing $450, almost $500. Is that going to come down? Yes, we're starting to see a little bit of that. Rents also, in the long-term perspective, go up over time as well. So from 2000, the median was, what do we got here? 60. 20 years later, 600. 20 years later, the average rent was 1,191. So from 2000 to 20 years later, the rent has more than doubled in that 20 years. This will give you an idea of what's actually happening with rents. And what's interesting to me, if you look at the 2008 timeframe, you can actually see that rents actually went up during that time. If you go from 2005 to 2010, we saw rents go down just slightly and then skyrocket back up because people that were losing their house needed a place to move into. It was one of two things. They moved in with family, or they got a less expensive rental property that they actually moved into, which put more demand on rents and rental properties. So rents double about every 20 years. So property values go up about 30 to 40% every 10 years. Every 20 years, you're going to see rents that are doubling. That's what's happened historically, right? Now, does that mean it's going to happen in the future? No, but I think there's a pretty good case to be said. Prices are getting more expensive over time if you're looking at the long term. And this is really important to know. This makes a big difference as we're looking at cash flow. So you're going to say, well, how do you buy the property right? That's what we're going to get into. I think as cheap as possible is the answer. Well, maybe. Let's talk about this. I used to look for price and I now look for value. I would say, hey, what's the cheapest property I could possibly buy? How can I turn that into a rental property? What can I do with that? I now look for value over cost. Okay, so what has the best value? This includes the cost, an emotional cost of management as well. So cheap houses, you can find very inexpensive houses, but I don't really like those. because those are typically duplex, threeplex, fourplexes. And the reason is the tenants usually don't stay very long. They're usually more what I call transient tenants, where they're typically 6 months, give or take. And the cost of turnover is very costly from my perspective. So what I like to do is spend my time investing in single family houses. Because of that, I find that it costs me less money to manage. I have less tenant turnover, meaning the tenants aren't leaving as frequently. And if I buy the right rental houses, then I am gonna do really well with this in a long-term perspective. So the point of declining returns. So where the property cost goes up and the rents don't follow it. So you can say, hey, at what point do my rents versus my property values cross each other where I'm getting declining returns? Meaning for each $50,000 more I spend on the property, I'm actually not getting that relative to the percentage of rents that I'm wanting. So you'll start to see this. One of the ways that you can do this, it's a little bit different in every single market, but I always like to be under one of the two. I like to be under the median price range for that county and always under the FHA loan amount. So how do you know that? You can just look in your county, type in your county and Google what's the FHA loan amount for single family house in whatever county you're in. It'll pop up, it'll take you to FHA and it'll say it's $350, it's $450, it's $475, it's whatever. I wanna always be under the FHA and somewhere around the median for that area. So I don't like expensive houses. It's hard to make money on expensive houses. So how do you make sure that you're buying this property right? Well, first off, you want to make sure that you're at least breaking even with all costs, including the loan. To do this, you have to understand the different costs of long-term rental. Now, this defies conventional wisdom, because typically you'd say, how much are I making if you don't talk about the loan? That's how you'd normally look at commercial properties and that type of stuff, is what's our cap rate? And the cap rate is we're not taking the loan into consideration, because my loan interest rate and your loan interest rate may be different, because I might be qualified different. I might put more money down than you put down, or you might put more money down. I don't care about those things. That's conventional wisdom. I'm saying throw that out the door. What we're gonna talk about is, hey, what is it going to do if I buy this property with the financing I'm going to get? Where am I gonna be? So let's jump into this cost of rental properties. So this gets into this. So this can be drastically different. We understand that, but we are not traditional. We're not looking for traditional things. We are not looking for tradition, okay? So what we wanna do is make sure I can break even with my financing costs, which may be different for you and different for me, but what is going to break even with my financing costs, your financing costs, okay? So let's talk about the cost of long-term rentals. We've got mortgage, we've got property taxes, we've got insurance, we've got water, sewer, garbage, gas, electric, vacancy, repairs, capital improvements, and HOA. Those are the things that are going to be costs to you in a long-term rental property, or I should say cost for a long-term rental property. Who pays that? We're going to talk about that. Okay, so let's start with the easy stuff, okay? On every one of my houses, the tenant pays for all utilities. All the utilities. They pay for gas, they pay for electric, they also pay for water, sewer, and gas, electric. Water and sewer is typically done by the city. And if it is included in my tax bill, I'm passing that on to my tenant so they can actually pay that. The more water they use, the more that they're gonna pay. Okay, so the more, and then garbage is usually in there as well, and my tenants are paying for that. Most of the utilities will allow you to do what's called a landlord account, and a landlord account will say, hey, if they don't pay the bill, let me know, and don't shut it off until I know about it, because I don't want to have pipes freezing and those types of things. So they'll let you know if the tenant doesn't pay, which is also a great sign, because you can call the tenant and say, hey, what's going on here? You haven't paid your light bill, or you haven't paid this. Okay, so what's going on? It can tell you if there's issues. Also, they'll let you know if utilities get off, but we'll talk about that, or we talked about that earlier. So typically with your loan payment, you're gonna have what's called PITI, okay? Principal, interest, taxes, insurance is what you're looking at. That's the PITI is basically what that is: principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, okay? So HOA is homeowners association. I don't like to buy when there's a homeowners association. You typically have Big Brother looking over. It can cause some problems. It can also have some good, but I do my best not to buy in HOAs. I would not buy because of an HOA, but I would prefer not to buy one that is in an HOA. If I found a great deal in an HOA, I would buy it, but I would much prefer to not be in an HOA if that makes sense. So I'm not going to be targeting those, and I'm not going to say no if it's a great deal, but I'm not going to go after them. The other thing is there's just a lot of bureaucracy and there's a lot of extra costs when you're dealing with an HOA. So now, where I left off, now what we're talking about now is the big three. We're talking about vacancy, repairs, and capital improvements. That's the ones that we're talking about here. So you've got your PITI, you've got the tenant that's taking care of the utilities, water, sewer, and garbage. But these are the big ones. And this is what most people forget. This is what most people don't even think about, don't even calculate. They don't look at these types of things. And these are the biggest costs that are gonna kill you if you don't do it right. So vacancy being number one, okay? Most landlords don't think about that. If you don't, you can find yourself in big trouble. So let's talk about the difference between capital improvements versus repairs, because I get asked that quite frequently. So a capital improvement would be replacing the roof. A repair, capital improvement is going to last 20 years or 30 years, whatever the case is. Whereas patching the roof to fix it, that's going to give you another few years or whatever the case is, that is going to do just a repair. So a repair is going to be something temporary that's going to help you last for a while, where a capital improvement is going to be something that's going to be for a long duration of time. Typically, you're talking about a furnace, an AC, a roof. Those are the types of things we're talking about with capital repairs rather than or capital improvements versus repairs. So on my properties, this is what I do. I plan on 5% of my rents going for capital improvements, okay? So 5% of my rents go to capital improvements every single month. 5% of my rents go to repairs and 5% of my rents go to vacancy. Well, how do I know this? Because I've been doing this for 20 years and my management strategy actually works, so these numbers work. Now, am I actually paying 5% every single month? No, I'm taking that money, I'm putting it in a high yield savings account. That money's sitting there, it's getting some high yield, and then when the capital improvement comes along, I'm able to pay that. Also, we've got the repairs. When do those come? Whenever, you really don't know. And vacancies, I actually have a pretty good idea in vacancies because I'm able to predict that based upon my system of management. So let's just say the rent's $1,000, okay? Rent's $1,000 per month. I set aside $50 each month for capital improvements. I go put it in a bank account, high yield savings account. I also set aside $50 per month for repairs, okay? I set that aside. And I also set aside $50 per month for vacancy. I usually don't use the money for vacancy, and I'll show you why here in just a minute. So that means all my other costs have to be less than $850, okay? So that means my PITI has to be under $850. That's my loan, my principal, my interest, and my taxes all have to be under that $850. If it's not, then it's not a good rental property. If you can't fit it on all these under that amount, if you can do that, it's a good deal. If you can't, it's not a good deal, okay? So you basically need all of your costs. Once you take out the vacancy, the capital improvements, and the repairs, once you take those out of a 5% each, so 15%, what's left needs to be able to cover everything else, PITI, HOA if applicable, as long as your tenant is paying for the utilities. Now, let's say it's a crazy situation and you need to pay for the utilities for some weird reason. The utilities would have to fit under that as well in order for you to meet the ratio, so that it would be a good investment and you know that you're actually buying right. So keep in mind though that rents go up over time, right? Rents go up over time, values go up over time. There are also tax write-offs you will get as you are running a business and as you will get for some of the properties based upon this. So the key is to understand what the property will actually rent for. So, okay, I know what I need to do. I need to find out what the property rents for. I need to make sure I take 5% for vacancy, capital improvements, and repairs. That's 15%. And I need all the other costs that I'm going to pay. Excuse me. All the other costs I'm going to pay as a landlord need to be underneath that amount. And as long as I'm breaking even, it's probably a good property. Now, if I can make some money, even better, okay? Even better. But you cannot overestimate your rents. This is a big mistake people make all the time, is they say, you know what, I think mine's gonna rent for more because my property's nicer or this or that. My key to rental success is actually buying houses in good areas, and I buy long-term rentals, And then I want my people to stay a minimum of 2 years. My average is 5 years. And I actually would prefer that they stay for 15 years, which is my longest tenant so far, has been with me for 15 years. Now, in my rental application, I ask them, do you have a toolbox? Do you have a lawnmower? Do you have a snowblower? We're here in Utah, right? It snows. Not all the time, but it snows in the wintertime, right? So if they don't have those things, they're not going to be a good tenant for me because I am not the Marriott. I don't want somebody that's going to pick up the phone and be like, oh, there's snow, come snow blow it, or have somebody come do that. No, I want homeowners. I want glorified renters that want to be homeowners, that treat it like their home. I don't want to send a repair guy out there all the time. And so I actually do that, and I discount my rent to find people that have these things. So if the rent is $1,000 a month, I may rent the property for $950 a month because then I'll get someone in there on a deal. They will stay longer. They in turn will take care of the property and doing some of these things. Now, I'm not saying major repairs or anything else like that, but if the toilet's leaking, they're gonna go take their screwdriver, take whatever and tighten it up. So those types of things save big bucks for landlords. And if you can buy the property right, which is looking at those types of things, then you will be buying a great property knowing rents will go up over time, values will go up over time, and also the tenant is gonna be paying your loan amount down every single month. So let's just recap here as we're talking about this cash flow, what you learned today, how to start a cash flow rental business. You find houses that break even with all costs compared to the rent, which includes the vacancy, capital improvements, and repairs. Then do it again and again, okay? Then do it on a regular basis. Those are things that you've got to do to be successful with cash flowing rental properties.